Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to invite you with a warm heart to this session of the Great Books, where we're going to conclude our consideration of Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. But before I jump into the philosophy of the moment, I just want to say hello from lockdown to lockdown. I'm still in Amsterdam. I mentioned last time I'd come for a rather short business trip, and then all of a sudden the world changed, and here I still am. I'm presuming that most of you are under some form of lockdown. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're safe. I hope you're healthy. I hope your families and communities are navigating through this quite extraordinary moment with a semblance of elegance and thoughtfulness as we experience our first global pandemic in which everybody everywhere is experiencing more or less the same thing and navigating through some form of lockdown or another. And this is quite a moment for all of us. Just as a quick update, we at the university are taking it in. We're redesigning our summer courses. We announced this past Sunday in our Chartres community call that all 5 of the summer courses, the dissertation writing, Grammatica, the first of the liberal arts, the Caves in the Dordogne, Madonna Rising, and the Mary Magdalene pilgrimage are all being transitioned into virtual learning experiences. So as an institution, with all of us in lockdown in different parts of the world, we're continuing to learn how to work together. We're adjusting and adapting to the situation as it unfolds. And I just want to start this call by just heart to heart expressing my deep empathy with whatever it is that you're going through. And I hope that when we get to the discussion, that whoever is inclined to speak will share basically how they're doing. And one of the things we're doing, by the way, is we have decided to convene, which we'll be announcing on Earth Day in about a week's time on the 22nd of April. It's the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. We're going to be announcing what we're calling Humanity Rising, a global solutions summit starting on May 22nd. We're gathering people from all over the world. We've been working on it for only about 2.5 weeks. And we have now scores of participants and organizations that are partnering with, representing over 4 million members. So when I say that this is a global experience, it's really a reality. And the question that we're framing the entire global summit around is, what kind of world do we want beyond the pandemic? Many of our governments are going to try to seduce us into just going back to business as usual. That's what caused the problem. And we need to use this moment where everybody in the world is having the same feeling, the same thoughts, the same questions, to ask ourselves, as a global community, what kind of world do we want on the other side? So we'll be bringing much more information to you over the coming days. It's very exciting. And I would just say, before we launch into Nietzsche, the great learning for me out of this pandemic is that every crisis has an opportunity. And if you just, wherever you are, whoever you are, whatever you're doing, no matter how low or constrained or crisis-ridden you feel, embedded in that, like a pearl in an oyster, is an opportunity. And if we can all just start tracking the opportunities that are being offered to us by this crisis, we'll come out stronger, we'll come out more refined, and we'll become more confident in ourselves as human beings, having endured and triumphed in this hour. In part, I wanted to start this way, not only to create solidarity, but to set the foundation for the consideration of Nietzsche. We went over his life and very troubled times in our last lecture. We discussed his unrequited love for the Lou Salome, the beautiful Lou Salome, his tortured physical condition, the anguish of his soul, out of which came extraordinary genius. And I think when we turn our thoughts to the great book that he wrote after Thus Spoke Zarathustra, we get a measure of the kind of philosophical perspective that is really helpful in a time such as ours. And I want to start by reading a single paragraph out of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, right out of the prologue. He says, I teach you the Overman, what in German is the Übermensch, sometimes translated as the Superman, the Overman. Humanity is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome yourself? What have you done to overcome yourself? All beings so far have created something beyond themselves. And do you want to be the ebb of this great flood? And even go back to the beasts rather than to overcome yourself? What is ape to man? A laughing stock or painful embarrassment. And man shall be that to the overman. A laughing stock or painful embarrassment. You have made your way from worm to man, and much in you is still worm. Once we were apes, and even now too, we are more ape than any ape. The overman is the meaning of the earth. Let your will say, the overman shall be the meaning of the earth. Humanity is a rope tied between beast and the overman. A rope over an abyss. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not an end. That's one of the most extraordinary paragraphs I have ever read. because it encapsulates a very deep perspective that can transform the soul when we all come into the realization that we are here for something greater. We are here to add meaning to the earth. We are here to derive from the earth the meaning that she has instilled in us as part of an evolutionary progression of being, forever becoming. This perspective of Nietzsche's, that the category of becoming is more fundamental than the category of being, is the essential reason for the fact, as I said in our last lecture, that in many ways Nietzsche brought the Western philosophical tradition to an end. Virtually every philosopher before Nietzsche only thought and wrote within the category of being. All our great Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, were crafted within the category of being. There's no sense of becoming. The earth was created, full stop, by a God who represents being. And during this time on the earth, we have a choice about whether to be good or evil as categories of being, as absolutes. The Bible says so. And depending on how we comport ourselves, we either go to heaven when we die or we go into the eternal abyss forever. And Nietzsche stood against this tradition, against the philosophical greatness of Plato and Aristotle, Kant, Descartes, Aquinas, Augustine, and said, no, being doesn't exist because everything is always becoming. And in this sense, Nietzsche was extremely Buddhist, even though he would not have recognized that in himself, and probably knew very little about Buddhism. There's no indication that he'd read very much of Buddhism or the Eastern religions. But he understood what the Buddha understood, that there's no separate self, that everything is always changing. And because everything's changing, because everything's evolving, we have an opportunity in our lifetime, no matter what is happening, to exceed ourselves, to triumph over our lower passions, our self-pities, our wounds, our acts of denial, and mold ourselves like the potter molds the clay into something beyond ourselves. That's what the Übermensch means. And we're going to go into more detail toward the end of my remarks about this. uh, meaning of the Ubermensch, the overman, the superhuman. But it is not anything mystical. It's not anything idealized. It's not a fantasy projection of a deluded soul. Nietzsche says, this is why the earth created us. Take that thought in for a moment. Last time when I referred to Thus Spoke Zarathustra, I said in contradistinction to all the traditions in the West, which you go up the mountain. Moses went up Mount Sinai. Jesus went up on the cross. Muhammad went up into the seventh heaven. Zarathustra, in the vision of Nietzsche, went down the mountain into the earth because it was the earth out of which he knew he came. And it's the discernment of the purpose for which the earth has created life that is culminated in us. That is the only question, says Nietzsche, that is worth contemplating. Why are we here? We are here to create something more refined. We are here to be more than who we were born to be. And it's within this context that I want to reflect on a few of the themes of Beyond Good and Evil. And I want to start with his first sentence, that what if he starts his preface, supposing that truth is a woman, what then? Is there not ground for suspecting that all philosophers, insofar as they have been dogmatists, have failed to understand women? That the terrible seriousness and clumsy importunity with which they have usually paid their addresses to truth have been unskilled and unseemly methods for winning a woman? Certainly, she has never allowed herself to be won. I'd like to just reflect on that for a moment. If all philosophy has been within the category of being, and all philosophers noted in the Western tradition have been 99% men, Nietzsche is saying, well, what if truth is a woman? What if truth is becoming? And you note that he refers to their, is there not ground for suspecting that all philosophers, insofar as they have been dogmatists, have failed to understand women, have failed to understand becoming? It's interesting. Women are in the cycle of nature. Women give birth. They have their menstrual cycles. They're in a constant process of becoming. They represent the lunar, the ebb and flow of the moon. That has been outside the consideration of virtually every philosopher that's ever thought in the Western tradition. And that's the reason, says Nietzsche, why the philosophers have been so dogmatic. If the world is static and it never changes, then truth is static, and you can articulate the truth in a very powerful dogmatic way. And that, says Nietzsche, is our greatest failure. And he starts with Plato, the notion of the eternal good, the notion of the idealized form. And he is grateful for Plato in many ways. But Plato, like all philosophers in the classical period in the West, were locked into this notion of being. And it never occurred to them that life was a woman, that truth is a becoming. I just want to seed that thought into your beautiful minds and just play with it. Just play with it. What if truth was a woman? What then? His basic philosophical premise is that if everything's becoming, truth is always in motion. And anytime you try to pin it down, it gets away. Anytime you want to say it is this and not that, it becomes not that. And he points out that if you look at the cultures around the world, there's all kinds of truths that are considered completely absurd in another culture. And he has a little passage, it's on page 63 in my book, which was the Dover edition, where he gives an example. He says, the beasts of prey and the man of prey are fundamentally misunderstood because nature is misunderstood. So long as one seeks a morbidness in the constitution of these healthiest of all tropical monsters in growth, or even an innate hell in them, as almost all moralists have done hitherto. Does it not seem that there is a hatred of the virgin forests and of the tropics among moralists? And that tropical man, the savage, must be discredited at all costs, whether as disease or deterioration of humankind, or as his own hell and self-torture. And why? Why do we denigrate the tropics? Why do we denigrate the savages, the natives? Because we live in the temperate zone, says Nietzsche. In favor of the temperate zone, we favor the temperate men. We favor the temperate morality. We favor the mediocre. We're in a period right now of an inversion of morality. In the last 30 days, the world has been plunged into social distancing. That wasn't even a concept. I had never heard the concept. I'd never heard those two words put together before the pandemic. And now all of us are keeping, a meter and a half away from anybody we meet. I haven't touched another human being since I came to Amsterdam 6 weeks ago. I'm sure it's the same for many of you. This is Nietzsche, that as circumstances change, our morality changes. And as our morality changes, our notion of truth changes. And in fact, that is the mark of the overman, the over person. Let's call it the over person, the superior person, the super person. is the ability to discern the truth appropriate to the emerging condition. And it's within this context that he has a particular criticism, as you know, in the chapters 3 and 4 of Beyond Good and Evil, of Western religions and Christianity in particular. And he talks about the spiritualization of cruelty. And I don't want to dwell on this too long because I want to cover other things, but I think it's worth noting that the religions that were born out of this notion of, first of all, a dualism between creator and created, where the category of being was the only framework within which either God or creation were understood, derived moralities that were pernicious and stultifying to the spiritual, personal development of the people within that culture. And it's worth just reading some of the passages from The Religious Mood, his chapter on the religious mood, that I just want to dive into for a few minutes. He talks about, the Christian faith from the beginning is about sacrifice. That's an extraordinary observation, and we see Christ on the cross sacrificing himself. Why are we sacrificing? Well, if you are by nature becoming, and if you are by nature growing, but you're caught in a culture that is about being, and if you're about being, then you have really tight categories around good and evil as opposites. Then you've got to keep the people who are always becoming from doing that. And that's why Nietzsche talks about Christianity as the spiritualization of cruelty, because what it did to itself to keep people in the category of being in straitjackets was unspeakable cruelty for the last 2,000 years, which has reduced Western culture to what he calls a herd mentality. And that's a very rich discussion here, but he says, the sacrifice of all freedom, all pride, all self-confidence of spirit. It is at the same time subjection, self-derision, and self-mutilization. There is cruelty and religious Phoenicianism, that's child sacrifice, in this faith, which is adapted to a tender, many-sided, and very fastidious conscience. That's the becoming. We're tender souls and we're put into the straitjacket of these religions. And some of us, it doesn't work out so well. We become heretics, or we become crazy, or we become witches. Those were the healthy people, according to Nietzsche. Those were the people who kept becoming within the straitjacket of being and dogmatism and finality. It takes for granted that the subjection of the spirit is indescribably painful. It's supposed to be painful. Look at the asceticism of the anchorites and all the priests. Cut yourself off from your sexuality. Negate your body. Force your soul into ascetic practices. It's supposed to be painful. That all the past and all the habits of such a spirit resist the absurdism in the form of which faith comes to it. all these self-imposed cruelties are called faith. And wherever the religious neurosis has appeared on earth so far, we find it connected with three dangerous prescriptions: solitude, fasting, and sexual abstinence. All negations of who we are, to force us into being something we are not by nature. And Nietzsche is asking us, what's wrong with this picture, ladies and gentlemen? What happened to eros? What happened to becoming? What happened to creativity? What happened to beauty? What happened to just being experimental and being in the state of unknowing? That's the question. That's what philosophy with a hammer, as Nietzsche referred to his philosophy as, is all about, is looking back into the past and everything that we've inherited from the perspective of becoming, not being. And if you just get this category shift, you get Nietzsche. You get Zarathustra. You get what is the inner dynamism of your life. And why, no matter what the crisis, there's a way out. There's a way to transcend. There's a way to supersede. There's a way to navigate into the future on a vector of opportunity. And of course, to the theme of beyond good and evil, it was believed here to be self-evident that a bad man was all at once a bad man as opposed to a good man. The hitherto existing psychology was wrecked at this point. Is it not possible it maybe have happened principally because psychology had placed itself under the dominion of morals? Because we believed in opposition of moral values and saw and read and interpreted these oppositions into the text and facts of the case? What's going on, says Nietzsche? Good and evil are just categories that change over time. Our task as the superhuman is to move beyond good and evil, the categories of being, and take responsibility for the individuation process that characterizes in every person in a unique and authentic way their pathway in service of the earth that created them, all of us, to go beyond ourselves in whatever creative way that is available to us. This brings me to the final major theme that I want to take up, and that is Nietzsche's notion of the will to power. What, he says, is it that motivates us, that stimulates us to be a rope across an abyss? And to yearn for the transformation of our clay into something more than what we are. Where does that come from? Think about it. Where does the yearning for spiritual development come from? Why do some people have it and some people don't? Asked Nietzsche. Because some people are perfectly happy to be consumers. Some people are perfectly happy to be part of the herd. And in fact, Nietzsche says the herd is a good stabilizing presence. But his call is to those of us who are not satisfied to be part of the herd, that are sensitized as he was to the injustices around us and feel a compulsion to do something about it. Where does that come from? And then once it's here, what do you do with it? That's how he understands the will to power. And I want to really end on this major theme, because his notion of the Superman and this notion of the will to power was so distorted after his death by his sister, who was virulently anti-Semitic and took his notes and amalgamated them in a way to serve an anti-Semitic agenda right at the moment when the Nazis were emerging on the scene. And they seized that for anti-Semitic, nationalistic, and completely xenophobic tendencies. But as I pointed out, no one was more anti-Semitic than Nietzsche. And I want to just dwell on that for a moment, because his notion of the Übermensch was so pure and so refined. And I would just like to explore it for just a few minutes. I've touched on it before, but it's a good note with which to end. Gives an example of the will to power. He says you can go out and beat up your neighbor. That's the will to power. Or you can go to your neighbor and offer your neighbor a gift. That's also the will to power. And the great individuation process of a person seeking to become superhuman in the sense of the Übermensch is someone who is always sublimating the will to power into something higher, more refined. At the heart of Thus Spoke Zarathustra and all of Nietzsche's subsequent works is this notion of the ultimate sublimation of the will to power upon the altar of creativity and beauty. I've mentioned before his three metaphors of the camel and the lion and the child. You know, we start off and we're like camels. We've got the entire inherited tradition. You know, I've known Plato and I love Plato, and I'm an American and I'm this and I'm that. And I've read the Torah and I've memorized the Quran, and I'm just so laden like a camel with everything that I've been taught, all the knowledge in my head, all the prejudices that I've learned. And then all of a sudden, for reasons ultimately that are obscure, some of us wake up and we realize that we're in this cave, to use the allegory from Plato, and we're shackled with chains we have put on ourselves. And we're bent almost to the ground with the load of our tradition. And all of a sudden we see that the load of the tradition, there's lights and it's refracting on the wall, and it's all an illusion. all that is an illusion. That's just baggage that's keeping us as camels. And if you remember how you began to flex as you realized and threw the baggage off, and you become fierce and courageous and empowered like a lion. And you taste freedom for the first time in your life. You discover that you're you and that your will matters. And you're not here to adhere to social convention. You're here to be authentically who you were born to be. As Nietzsche says, become who you are. The earth brought you into this moment to be something specific that's going to be additive to the meaning of the earth. That's why Zarathustra went down the mountain. You break your chains and you engage in all kinds of audacious behavior because you're trying to change the world. The future breaks through you. And then all of a sudden you realize that the fierceness of a lion was what you needed to break the bonds of the camel. And to become the truly superhuman, the true Ubermensch, you have to become a child. You have to understand that life ultimately is play. It's a dance. It's laughter. And as Nietzsche says over and over, ultimately, the superhuman is someone who's engaging in perpetual creativity, in adoration of beauty. That's why it's play. And by the way, that's why I love Ubiquity. And I love the team that we've got. We're in perpetual play because we're in perpetual creativity. Coming up with this Humanity Rising, this global solution summit as a response to the pandemic, my whole body has been coursing with creativity. I'm feeling fully alive because I've chosen not to be beaten down by the pandemic, but to create playfully into the future, offering into the unknown a small act of meaning. That's the state of going beyond good and evil. That's where the camel is. And it's worth going through the exercise as you consider Nietzsche's great work. What do you consider good? What do you consider evil? What conventions bind you? What is the source of shame, guilt? Do you feel shame about yourself? Do you feel guilt about yourself? Are you afraid you're going to go to hell when you die because you haven't been good? That's when you need the fierceness of the lion. to roar with a sound that breaks all chains. And then, says Nietzsche, you become a free spirit. And the free spirit, he says, luxuriates in the unknown, like the philosophers of old luxuriated in the known. You're consumed by creativity, as in the past, they were consumed with dogmatism. And you understand that you are here for something more, something greater. It's not about whether you're going to go to heaven or hell when you die. It's about what you've contributed to elongating this rope from the past to the future across the abyss. And the only way to do that, suspended, naked, vulnerable against the vastness of eternity, is to have the courage to be, the will to power, not to subjugate, but to create for the good of all, and ultimately for the earth, who brought each and every one of us into being precisely, says Nietzsche, for this purpose. Well, thank you for your consideration of these matters. We'll now turn to our discussion. Let me see who's here. Well, we got Raffaello with his hand up. Good. I'd like to hear from any of the other students. Michelle Blair, I'd love to hear from you, Michelle. And anyone else, just line up. I'd love to hear how you're doing, first of all. And I'd love to hear how you have refracted this presentation of Nietzsche. Raffaello.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So first of all, thank you, Jim. Nietzsche through you is awesome. I feel it's a mixture of Nietzsche and Jim that I love. It's like a progressive sort of like left-wing Nietzsche. I will comment on that a little bit more. Or this is how I perceive it. In terms of how I am, I'm doing well, and at the same time I have grief. I have grief around what's happening, and also have grief around our time in Chartres and in France together. So I'm choosing to feel it and to process that and to not bypass it, but turn it into creativity, as you said. But first, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it and allowing it to move through me.
Yeah,
so
very important.
That's where I am. I'm super focused, writing and studying a lot, and missing the fact that we won't be in person together, and also in that sacred place. So this is my report. And so to Nietzsche, I want to respectfully disagree with you on just one point.
Sure.
Which is that my sense is that Nietzsche's fluidity in moral values and his capacity to touch the becoming, however, turns to total rigidity of being when those values are applied to man. So in other words, he's very, as you say, very open to different conducts and actions in different times. However, I didn't see any hint that a noble man, or let's say, an ignoble man, a slave, can become a master ever. And so therefore, my sense is that Nietzsche's morality, at least from Beyond Good and Evil, is very strict. However, it is a morality seen as a property of men, not of actions. There are good men and ignoble men. And the good men form an aristocracy to which Nietzsche would love to sort of like go back. And I have here with me a passage that I wanted to quote, which is from page 193, where he says literally that the essential thing in a good and healthy aristocracy is to accept with a good conscience the sacrifice of innumerable men who, for its sake, for the sake of the aristocracy, had to be suppressed and reduced to imperfect men, to slaves and instruments. And so the fundamental faith of the nobleman must be that society should not exist for the sake of society, but only as foundation and scaffolding upon which a select species of being, the moral man, is able to raise itself to its higher task and in general its higher existence. So that that elicits my anger, my profound anger, and especially in a time like this, when, if anything, what we're hoping for is that in this great time of crisis, the becoming of people, the changing of conditions of people will be more facilitated. And then the other point, if you will allow just this energy to run through a little longer, the other point that really elicits my sacred anger is that Nietzsche is trying to pull us to a past, not to a future. This is what I feel. And the testimony of this is when he says that deep reverence for age and the traditional, belief in and prejudice in favor of ancestors and against descendants is typical of the morality of the powerful. And when conversely, men of modern ideas believe almost instinctively in progress and the future, this reveals clearly enough the ignoble origin of those ideas. So to me, it's crystal clear that for him, it was not a matter of moving forward to a golden age, but moving back. And that he had a clear sense of degeneration, for which there are some good reasons to do that if one looks around. But in my feeling, there is never a good reason for stopping to hope, desire, and will that the future needs to be better than the past. Because we can't go back and we can't turn our moral sense towards the past. Otherwise, we create atrocities and monstrosities in these times. So I loved reading it. I just wanted to focus on the points that made me burn with like philosophical anger, and wanted to propose that. Thank you,
It's
Jim.
always good to rise up in righteous indignation. It's a healthy thing. And just quickly before we move on, but I just wanted to say, as the staff knows, I went through deep grief when because I've been going to Chartres for 15 years, and it's part of my soul. It never occurred to me that we wouldn't be able to go to Chartres and do our annual pilgrimage. Basically the university shuts down for those weeks in July when we just make pilgrimage. It's almost like the Hajj. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And all of a sudden we weren't doing it. And that Robert Lifton talks about anticipatory mourning. When you lose a loved one very quickly, you don't have a time to prepare yourself for mourning. That makes the mourning even more difficult. And the pandemic has hit so fast, so hard, but so indelibly that we had to make decisions before I was ready to make the decision. And I was sort of the last one, sort of going kicking and screaming into the decision, as the staff will verify. So I know exactly what you're feeling. But then to just take your 2 points, because I think they're extremely valuable. You're right. Nietzsche has a shadow side, in my opinion. I haven't gone into it because I just wanted to express the exuberance and the power of Nietzsche in his fundamental catalytic philosophical impulse. But yeah, he was not only sort of anti-democratic in that sense, but he was intensely misogynistic. If you read the whole sections, he says that women basically aren't capable of the kind of elegance, and he even challenges whether they can be good cooks. I wish he could have met my mother. And but it was very misogynist and very, I would say, aristocratic in the way that you outlined. And I think it's very important to point out, in part because he never really recovered emotionally after Lou Salome refused him on the third proposal, and probably other reasons as well. I think in terms of your second point, my sense is that my reading of him is that he wasn't about the past. He was trying to pull people into the future, but he spent an inordinate amount of time hammering away at the past. He got obsessed with hammering the past, and he didn't give us, in my view, what I would have liked. I would have loved him to take not the hammer, but the wand into the future. And he really didn't do that, except for in metaphors like the Übermensch. So I think to that degree, you're correct, and really appreciate the depth of your reading of Nietzsche, because I think your remarks are absolutely right on. So thank you so much, and thank you for owning your grief. It's so important to be authentic about who we are and how we're feeling in the moment, knowing in the process of becoming, the moment's going to change. And therefore our mood and our feeling and our aptitudes will also change with it, as long as we're tracking that ever fluid vector. So thank you. Michelle, welcome.
Hello. Thank you, Jim, for a wonderful lecture. It's amazing to me right now, the synchronicity that's happening, not in my own life, but just what I see around me. And I just finished on Easter Day this book, which was kind of ironic that I would finish it. It's about the darkening age. It's about the Christian destruction of the classical world.
Oh.
And this was so powerful for me because I think that my chains have always been my Christian upbringing, and I have a more fundamental family, and being able to be truly myself in a culture that doesn't celebrate or support it but shames it has been challenging. It's been difficult. And so I appreciate Nietzsche because he's kind of like giving me a permission slip in many ways to be that. And as I've gone through, I guess, really more intensely this last year of questioning what is for myself, this wild woman or this wild self, yet also what does it mean to be refined? And because refined in maybe a socially acceptable culture that's looking through the lens of a Christian would be, children to be seen, not heard. Refinement to subdue yourself or to not speak or be your truth. in order to be, so this idea of refinement has been curious, but again, synchronicity happens, and it talks about the Roman way was all about, sensuality and beauty and cultivation and courtesy, witty, and all those things were part of pre-Christianity. And then when I looked at that, even in the philosophers that I would look to, I would go, oh my gosh, this is so brilliant. But then I realized it's still from a fractured lens of Christianity. And then trying to go back to at the very end of this, I wrote down in my journal that Christianity became a violence of beauty. And if beauty holds grace, and it almost became the violence against grace. And here I am trying to hold mystery in my own life during this time. Then how do I find myself wanting to grasp for a habit of, if I can define it, if I can see it, then I can get out of it. And so just observing how my own trauma, and here we are talking about trauma, it's also brilliant. All of these different, it's like it's bringing it all to the surface, to examine, to question, and then and for me, it's about transmuting, because what I want to do is to get really angry, and anger, and then shame it and blame it. But that's not going to be helpful. I can use my anger, like Nietzsche says, to take it to something that's becoming, instead of trying to then stay stuck in the loop. So I guess that's how I'm doing, but also just Nietzsche has been quite helpful in giving me just more validation of what maybe I innately already know and have known probably my whole life. That's why I've been on this journey of trying to break out of that slave, the herd morality that surrounds me, and that I've been part of for many generations.
Yeah. And I think, just to expand on what you're saying, because I think it's very true, that it's not just Christianity per se, but we're in a culture, for example, of crass, gross consumerism. Mm-hmm. And that's what's got the U.S. In such a stitch right now, is that the pandemic has shut down with unbelievable force the consumer culture. And people can't go to the stores to buy anything. And that goes to the heart of the identity of, mass global culture. It's about your iPhone. It's about, what car you have. It's about the clothes, the fashion, everything. So that even though Nietzsche hammered away at Christianity as a religion, what he was hammering away at was anything that constrains you, and through either social manipulation, guilt, shame, as many commercials do, manipulate your feelings to want something that is not authentically you. That is what keeps you in being and keeps you from becoming, in Nietzsche's view of the world. And the book that you're reading, I haven't read it. I would love for you to email me the title, because I'd like to look at it. But okay. That was one of those incidences where classical culture, the Greco-Roman culture, which was so elegant, and had obviously enormous cruelties with slavery and subjugation of women, etc. But within that context, was so, I would say, free. How everything just began to just shut down when the Christian religion began to assert power. And just one fact that always pains me as a scholar, in the 3 centuries in the consolidation of the Christian religion over the Mediterranean world. 95% of all the books were burnt.
Yes, because knowledge became powerful. And if
Yeah,
they can take that away, it says, well, you
exactly.
don't need to know that because all you need is faith. And I find that to be a very interesting word, especially at this time.
Yeah, and
Is
it's
what
worth,
does faith
I
even mean?
raise this because that's what's happening now. Think about this for a moment, everyone. As the Christians consolidated power, they saw knowledge as the ultimate threat. What are the authoritarian leaders, starting with Donald Trump, doing to our knowledge with false news, fake news, the manipulation of news? So now nobody knows anymore what's actually true. That's part of a strategy around social isolation. Because if there's no shared truth between us, then how do we create solidarity? So this notion of what we know and how we know and the community that contains the knowing is emerging, particularly in an era of social distancing, to be a critically important factor. And I would welcome all of you. In fact, Georg, I don't know whether we can send it out. It's on our Ubiverse. If you, I hope you're all signed up on our Ubiverse. But a guy named Charles Eisenstein wrote a beautiful op-ed called "The Coronation." It's really interesting that the coronavirus is the crown. And then in some ways, he says the pandemic is the coronation of humanity. And one of the things that he talks about in that essay is how our knowledge is being manipulated so that we don't even know what we know and don't know anymore. And that's an instrument of the elite. And that's what creates the herd morality and the herd mentality. So what you're bringing up, Michelle, about that Christianization of the Greco-Roman civilization into something that was earth-denying, body-denying, etc., is happening now, and we need to understand that it's happening and guard against it. And by the way, we're having Charles Eisenstein give one of the opening keynotes for the summit on May 22nd, along with Jane Goodall and some of the others. He's very, very thoughtful. So go up on Ubiverse and get and track him down. You can get it in the search box. So thank you, Michelle, very much.
I've
Linda.
added the link. The link is in there. You guys won't read it.
Oh, good. Thank you, Georg. It's well worth reading, and he actually reads it. I listen to it, and listening to him read it is also very, very powerful. Linda,
Hi,
first of all, how are you?
I'm really well. I actually feel like finally I'm in sync with the world. Like, honestly, this slowing down and the time for reflection and contemplation. And first off, I want to offer everyone a virtual hug because I think, we've done enough work in the field that, just the sharing, I feel so embraced by everyone in this call. And Jim, your words, honestly, I was just drinking it all in. I just feel so full. And then hearing Raffaello and Michelle, I'm not even sure why I raised my hand or what I wanted to say. But yeah, I really am enjoying this time. And I think what's most alive for me and how you presented this speaks so present, with where we are politically in the United States. And what touched me really deeply is more on a personal level, that when I returned 10 years ago, I couldn't find my place back in the American culture. My values were so different. And the analogy that I used was a tightrope. that I was walking this tightrope away from what no longer served. And I felt very alone with it. And, being in this group and the studies we're doing together, it's the collective walking that feels so important, that I think we're in times where it's too much for, back in the day, they were doing it individually and bringing, these from the depths of themselves into culture. And we're in times now where we are doing it collectively. And then also in Chartres last year, I had a dream, that I was walking across this bridge and I looked over the side and it was eternity. And you spoke to that, in these writings. So for me, it's just really validating that our deepest knowing, which is beyond knowledge, beyond books, beyond philosophies, as we bring that forth and share it with each other, that we truly are, co-creating this new superhuman, which is, I think it's the collective. The Dalai Lama has spoken to that. And I'm always so deeply touched. It's such a joy to listen to you, Jim. My whole body just relaxes. There's no filtering and I can just let it in. Literally, it's, and I think the reason I raised my hand is just wanting to contribute, that there's so much outpouring that I just don't want to hold it, that
Yeah.
to be able to offer it back and to feel a part of this is really just what I want to acknowledge. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that affirmation. I love this course and I feel very passionately about the books that I speak to. And I think you're absolutely right, that the world is slowing down till finally you're feeling comfortable.
Yeah.
And let us hope and pray that we will collectively actually savor this moment. As somebody said, it's like Mother Earth sent us all to our rooms and said, think about this for a while. And we've all been kind of thinking about it for a while. What's going on here?
Yeah.
And that's a healthy thing if we come out with the right solutions.
Yeah.
And are just present with each other and figure out how to do virtual hugs through virtual courses such as these and feel the intimacy of physical contact virtually. That's actually a high art form and challenge for us in an era of social distancing.
Exactly.
And by the way, Yanjung Sung said in the chat that the first emperor of China did the same thing. He burned books and buried the intelligent people. Yeah, that was the origin of the first Chinese dynasty, the Qin dynasty in 221 BC.
Jim,
And
if I could have one, sorry.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add one more thing that I thought of is as we enter into this subtle realm, also the camel right now, of needing to communicate without our physical touch. I mean, even that is a more recent camel. And so when we go back, it's curious how ingrained the social distancing is becoming, or the physical distancing, that we literally are transcending that, in this moment.
Yeah.
Of connecting physically. So thank you.
Well, I've noticed to that point, it's a really good point, Linda. I've noticed in Amsterdam, sometimes when people meet in the road, they're touching elbows. And I saw a little clip someone sent me of in China where they would reach out their right foot so they would cross and just have their feet meet. But we're spawning all kinds of ways because we know we can't shake hands. I don't know what the French are going to do with all the kissing they've been doing, whether they're going to kiss elbows or what. But we're in a kind of a molting of new social norms that'll emerge out the other side, and it'll be very interesting to see how different cultures adapt.
In the Maoris, they rub noses and share breaths.
So yeah, so thank you for that. But just to also to go back to Yanjun Song's comment, that was the same thing a little before what Michelle was bringing to our attention. but there was book burnings, executions, and the attempt was to wipe out the past. And when you think that by then, by 221 BC, the Tao Te Ching, the foundation of Taoism, the Analects of Confucius, Mencius's work, the I Ching, which was ancient even in the 6th century BC when Lao Tzu and Confucius wrote. The I Ching was already an ancient book, that there was a dynasty that tried to wipe it all away as somehow not necessary in a regime which was founded on severe penalties for the minorest of infractions. And it became a completely transactional, utilitarian regime without any need of philosophy, spirituality, religion, or reverence. And fortunately, people of goodwill, Ubermenschens at that time, superhumans, hid away a number of the texts, and they survived in China like they survived in the Mediterranean, making their way into the Arabic world and then through the North Africa up to Spain and then back into Europe 1,000 years later. It took 1,000 years for the burnings to work through a cycle and for the books that were on the pathway to being burnt to re-enter European culture. And it was in those books that ignited the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and the modern era. Think that thought. That which the early Christians sought to completely wipe away is responsible for everything we are today. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful thought. Okay, is there anyone else that would like to speak before we close it off?
John Yun raised her hand. She's a panelist now.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes left. Yes, please. Oh, Yanjun, she's in China. Where are you? You're in Beijing?
No, I'm in Kurdistan.
Kurdistan.
Yes.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Good to see you. Good to see you. We've emailed back and forth, but I've never seen you. So it's wonderful to see you. Welcome.
Thank you. In fact, I'm following the courses all the time. So I know you, I know Dr. Jim preached a lot. I listened a lot of the courses. I love the courses so much. I wanted to say during the coronavirus, the ubiquity had so many courses, offered a lot of free courses. I love the courses so much. So I'm always very busy with all. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Jan Jun. We are very pleased that you're part of she's one of our doctoral students and has been writing some splendid papers that I've had the honor to read. And I'm glad that you're enjoying our courses. We thought that with the pandemic, we wanted to make as much as free as possible so people who are staying home would have the benefit of some of the best learning in the world. And I'm very pleased to be able to greet you and see you. It makes me very happy. So thank you for identifying yourself. One more question and then we'll close it off from Margot Borden. Hello, Margot.
Hi. Okay, there. Hi, Jim. Hi, everyone. So I'm sitting here in Scottsdale, Arizona. I think I can say this for myself and for everyone. It's surreal. It's bizarre everything is okay. The sun is out. The sky is beautiful. The stars are more shiny and more clear than ever. And yet the news and all the noise out there and the connections that I have through my work with the outside world are like in sharp contrast to this moment. And I'm just so delighted to have met you, Jim, at Chartres last summer, and to be on this trajectory. It's tremendous. I can't express my amazement and my gratitude enough. So I struggled through Nietzsche. After spending much of my life in my own cognitive biases about more mystical, and the like deep inner and rejection of the outer and rejection of the intellect. And now as I hear your lecture, I'm experiencing it, yes, in my head with ideas, but also vibrationally. And so your words, your understanding, your integration of the material is that I'm struggling with has brought it to life. And I'm sitting, in a sense, in between the sense, the feeling it vibrationally and then the head. There's a gap still. I'm waiting to the two pieces to join together of the intellect, and wondering also, I don't know if you know Colin Wilson, The Outsider. Yeah, the analysis of genius and the pitfalls that genius can fall into, and looking at Nietzsche's means. Maybe he intuited the greatness that we can become. He spent a lot of time looking out there and finger pointing out there, and maybe in his mind could fathom the greatness that we can become, the Übermensch. I'm not sure if he reached it, but he certainly tried to deconstruct what it wasn't and point the way to what it could be. But Colin Wilson feels that one of the reasons he lost his mind is because it was only in the mind, it wasn't a balanced, even though he pointed out to us that it can be embodied and we can become liberated, that perhaps that was his shortcoming.
No, clearly, you're raising a very important point. He was understanding something so immense, but he was so unintegrated, it literally blew his mind. Literally blew his mind. And that was the agony and the ecstasy and the tragedy of Friedrich Nietzsche. He was insane, literally, for the last 10 years of his life. And it was a real tragedy. He died at the age of 56. He was taken care of by his sister. He could barely speak, had a series of strokes, and died, unmourned. And it was only later that his greatness began to emerge as we know it today. So this is a good point to end with, how you integrate intellectually and emotionally and physically this information is critical. Does it feel right for you? Maybe it doesn't. If it doesn't, then don't go there. There's many roads to Rome, and all the roads lead to Rome. And Margot's correct that he got so caught up in deconstructing the past. Basically, what he was saying to Western civilization is there's no turning back. You got to leave it all behind. And then he was exhausted and deconstructed himself with putting out that message, and it destroyed him. So we have glimmers of the future, but we don't have the substance that a genius, an integrated genius, probably would have been able to deliver to us. What is the meaning of the Uberman? And it's within that context that I want to, with real excitement, say that the next month I'm going to be talking to the book by Joe Dispenza called "You Are the Placebo." And the book that he's written after that is Becoming Superhuman. So Joe Dispenza is my current favorite person. I believe he's the first post-axial teacher. The first truly post-axial teacher. He doesn't have any recourse to the past. But he's so deeply integrated in his own being that he speaks from the mysticism of the past, but uses only the language of science. It's really beautiful. And all of his work, all of his teaching is around how do you become superhuman? That's Nietzsche. How do we, stretched out across the abyss from past to present with a rope, how do we become more of who we are intended to be? That's what Joe Dispenza teaches and works on, both with himself and his community, 24/7, 365. And he's really changing a lot of lives. So I want to go from the Tibetan book, The Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism, in January, February, to Nietzsche, Beyond Good and Evil. And then we want to immerse ourselves in how do we actually become superhuman? What is the pathway? And I believe that Joe Dispenza has cracked some very, very important codes. So I'm very excited that next month we're diving into his book, You Are the Placebo. And that's the key to becoming superhuman. You, me, I am the placebo. I'm the cure I've been looking for. All of us are. And he offers a formula for how you activate it. So next month, it's going to be Joe Dispenza's You Are the Placebo. Well, thank you, everyone. This has been very heartful for me today. I've very deeply resonated with each and every one of your comments, and I look forward to seeing all of you in a month's time. Be well and navigate that lockdown with a smile. Track the opportunities. Bye-bye.